We may have done 100 videos on the channel so far, but this is the best vehicle that I've covered. It's the Swiss Army knife of vehicles. It is the Range Rover Classic from 1970. Go anywhere and do anything. Originally known as the VLR, Rover never hid the fact that their original Land Rover 4x4, which went on sale in 1948, was inspired by the famous US military Jeep. The Range Rover of 1970, however, was unique, bigger, heavier and better equipped than any previous Land Rover. It opened an entirely new type of market, the modern-day SUV. Although it was convicted simply as a bigger Land Rover even before it went on sale, it had become more of a gentleman's 4x4 and less of an all-can-do workhorse. And that process carried on over the next 25 years. By the time the last Range Rover Classic was produced, in my year of birth, 1995, no fewer than 317,615 had been built. The first Range Rovers had a 100-inch wheelbase and were powered by a detoned version of Rover's ex-GM V8 engine, had a newly engineered four-wheel drive layout, and their beam front and rear axles ran on the long travel coil springs. Not only did the light alloy clad estate body shell look smart, but it was also a vehicle with quite unrivaled on or off-road abilities. Although Range Rover originally looked on the Range Rover as a hard-working and versatile tool which could be used in the most appalling conditions, which it indeed was and still can be, they soon found that more and more customers were using it as a large high-capacity estate car which rarely left surface roads. Apart from most Range Rovers that were sold rarely attempted anything more than wet gravel on a supermarket car park, which were met by Rover with broad smiles and the response, "Look at the sales figures." Although the styling altered only slightly over the years, the specification advanced considerably. Automatic transmission, 5 forward speeds instead of 4, and eventually a fuel-injected version of the engine were all added in the 1980s. A 5-door body option with the same overall package was an instant bestseller. Limited edition packs called Vogue soon became regular options, whilst the specification, equipment, fittings and all features gradually increased. By the late 1980s, the Range Rover was also available with a diesel option, which was more popular in certain export markets and with businesses than it ever was with private British buyers. And before long, the most expensive, high-specified versions had a 200 British horsepower 4.2 litre engines, longer wheelbase bodies and self-levelling suspension. Early cars, which had a top speed of 92 miles per hour, were quite outclassed by these machines, which could top 110 miles per hour, although the fuel consumption was very, very high, worse than 15 miles per gallon. During the 1990s, Land Rover Discovery appeared, using the original short Range Rover chassis, and from 1994 there was a completely new generation Range Rover, even faster, more expensive and glossier than ever before. In 20 years the Range Rover had established an entirely new market sector, which left its rivals struggling to catch up. Specifications. Years in production, first generation, 1970 to 1995, structure, front engine / four-wheel drive separate chassis, engine, V8 cylinder overhead valve, original type, bore and stroke 88.9 times 71.1 millimeters, capacity 3,528 cc, power 135 British horsepower at 4,750 revs per minute, fuel supply, 2 SU carburetors, suspension, beam front axle and beam rear axle, weight 3,880 pounds, and top speed, and I would love to see this, 99 miles per hour. So I have an overview coming up of who it was used by and the expeditions it went on. Built at Solihull in the United Kingdom and Enfield in Australia. So they were produced in New South Wales from 1979 to 1983 and produced in Venezuela, of all countries, by the Tractor Agoro, that's AGRO, group. They were representatives of Land Rover and Mack trucks in Venezuela, and they were in production there from 1973 to 1981. In North America, the list price for a Range Rover was $5,300, and it was launched on the 16th of March 1987. If I had to compare this to any tool, I would definitely compare it to a Swiss Army knife. So this is just a small number of things that the Range Rover was used for. It was used in my favourite version, the TACR2, Truck Firefighting Airfield Crash Rescue, 2-ton 6x4 Mark II Range Rover that was used as a rapid response vehicle by the Royal Air Force, the Queen's Flight and Royal Navy. The Royal Air Force used them in Norway as well, and the original TACR1 was based on a Series 2 Land Rover chassis. I thought only Carmichael built the crash tender version, but clearly not. It seems like Gloucester Saro and HBC Angus built them as well. If you do want to see the crash tender version, there is one at Yorkshire Museum in Elvington. I travelled there in 2013, an hour and a half from my home just to see that, and that is fully operational by the looks of it. There is 2 at Caernarfon Airport in North Wales. When I went there in 2017 and 2019, they were still operational. Whether they are now, I have no idea. And there is one at East Kirby, which is the Lincolnshire Aviation Heritage Centre. Looking at this photograph, that is non-operational, unfortunately, and in my opinion should really be indoors. But then they have a fully operational Lancaster bomber there, so they probably don't have any room for it. But I would love to do separate videos on the Popemobile, the crash tender and the ambulance version in the future. It was also used by the Royal New Zealand Air Force's Medical Service. Pope John Paul II had 2 Range Rovers and they cost £128,000. One is now on display at the Cars of the Stars Museum in Las Vegas, and I believe that used to be in Cumbria. And one was taken back to the Vatican and was still in use as of 2013. I didn't know that he'd taken one back to the Vatican. I didn't know that it was in use maybe beyond 2013. What I do know is he has a Mercedes G-Wagon, the current Pope, and I thought that's the one that he uses now. But who knows? It could be in the Carriage Museum in Vatican City, because I know the small Renault 4 that he uses daily is. Other users of the Range Rover Classic include the royal family, the Queen, the Pope on his 1982 visit. He also had a Leyland truck, and you can see that at the British Commercial Museum in Leyland. The Royal Air Force, the Royal Navy, and number 32 Squadron, the Queen's Flight, used them as fire tenders, and the Queen's Flight had 3 of them, I believe, and they are painted in dark blue, just like all of their firefighting appliances are. British Traffic Police, Rural British Fire Brigades, the Camel Trophy Expeditions, the famous I think it was from 1972, Darien Gap Expedition, where a party of Royal Engineers went from the north to the south of this impenetrable jungle. The Americans tried it previously, but their jeeps and cars were wrecked, and these Range Rovers were not wrecked. And if you want to see that and the Queen's Range Rover, head on down to the National Motor Museum at Gaydon. They're on display there. I'm sure that MI5 used it, and various other expeditions and scientific research parties, plus of course the oil industry. 1972 Expedition Alaska to Cape Horn, and two of the most famous, in my mind at least, were used on the 1977 programme. I think it was called World About Us on the BBC, and they were the two camera vehicles for Destination Doha. And if you are into trucks like me, it's where the company Astran went from, I think it was Ashford in Kent, all the way to Doha in the Middle East, delivering pipe and other essentials, and going up the Alps. One of the cameramen was strapped onto the back. He was standing on the back bumper filming these trucks as they were coming up the mountain passes in a snowstorm. And then once they got there, they put them into one of the trailers and drove them all the way back. So there you are. They've been used by absolutely everybody. Oh, and the British Army used them on Salisbury Plain. So there you go. Probably the UN as well. And as we can see here, a good few of them were converted to camper vans, and quite a few more were converted with a third axle, and even into limousines. It seems if you want something unusual, get a 3-axle Range Rover. And G4 Challenge also use them for their expeditions around the world. And remember how earlier I said it was the Swiss Army knife of vehicles? It seems like it can just lend its hand to anything, as you can see through some of these weird, wonderful and wacky photos. And by the way, some of these photos are part of my huge diecast collection. See more of that on Diecast Days. And there's going to be more diecast coming up on this channel very soon. So stay tuned to Andy's Vehicle History channel and Diecast Days. What a joy to do a video on one of my favourite vehicles. And this has been amazing. My ex-driving instructor, who I'd known for several years, he actually had one from 1997 to 2003. He said if the fuel consumption wasn't that high, and if he could pay the cost of fuel, he would have kept it, especially on that very costly visit in 2001 down to London. And I think it's like all Land Rovers really. They just have so much character, and you have so much affection for them if you're into this type of vehicle. Many Land Rover enthusiasts have said you can't just have one Land Rover, you have to buy another one. Same as my ex-doctor, who actually had a 1973 Series 3, and he also had a 2004 Land Rover Defender in silver with jerry cans on the roof, even though he never participated in any expeditions. Oh, what a guy he was. But more on him and the Land Rover Defender in another video. And this legend will be motoring on for many years to come. I'll see you on Wednesday. Have a good one. Ta-da.